This morning at 6:47 Eastern Standard Time, the Canadian Embassy in Washington accepted a formal diplomatic communication signed by ambassadors from 39 countries. It voiced clear backing for Canada's stern warning to the United States and promised joint steps if the Trump administration ignores the March 18 deadline set by Canada. Within a couple of hours, by 9 a.m., the total reached 40 nations, covering every continent apart from Antarctica. Among those signing are the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the complete set of 27 EU members, Norway, Switzerland, Singapore, along with various countries from Latin America and Africa. This goes well beyond a mere show of diplomatic unity. These 40 countries account for more than 60% of worldwide GDP and over half of global trade. And they have now officially lined up alongside Canada in direct opposition to the United States, the biggest collective pushback against American influence since the United Nations came into existence. Leading this effort and pulling together the group in under a day following his delivery of the ultimatum is Prime Minister Mark Carney. When the White House staff started their day, they realized the U.S. wasn't dealing solely with a disagreement involving Canada anymore. Instead, it confronted resistance from a worldwide group that encompasses America's nearest allies, top trading counterparts, and crucially, key security collaborators. Trump clearly didn't anticipate any of this, leaving him to decide whether to give in to what Canada is demanding or to engage in a trade and diplomatic battle against roughly half the planet. In the following analysis, I'll guide you through the way Carney put together this 40-country partnership so quickly, less than 24 hours, and detail what commitments each group of nations has made. I'll outline the precise joint steps these countries plan to carry out should the U.S. decline to honor Canada's ultimatum. I'll cover how officials inside the White House have reacted and explain why some are calling this the gravest diplomatic isolation the United States has encountered since the Revolutionary War era. I'll discuss the reasons nations that rely so much on American markets and protection are prepared to face potential U.S. backlash to stand with Canada. Finally, I'll present two possible outcomes for what unfolds when 40 countries act together in opposition to the United States. Subscribe to become part of the community and share this video if you found it worthwhile. Let me take you through the actual wording of the diplomatic note because its phrasing makes clear this is much stronger than just verbal encouragement. The communication declares, the signing nations voice complete endorsement of the 5 conditions presented by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on March 4, 2026. We consider these conditions the essential foundation for rebuilding a workable relationship between the United States and Canada, grounded in mutual respect and equal sovereignty. We urge the United States to fulfill these conditions before the March 18th cutoff. Should the United States fail to do so, the signing nations pledge to enact the following synchronized responses in solidarity with Canada. The note then spells out 4 concrete measures that every one of the 40 countries will put into effect at the same moment if the deadline passes without compliance. First, improved trade preferences for Canada. Every signing nation agrees to grant Canada better trade conditions, such as lower duties on Canadian products, faster border clearance, and favored entry into their markets. This sets up a worldwide framework, giving Canadian sellers stronger positions abroad than their American rivals, effectively tilting the balance of competition away from the U.S. Second, firm energy buying pledges. European countries, Japan, South Korea, and several others promise extended contracts to purchase Canadian oil, natural gas, and power at above-market rates. Together, these deals amount to more than $180 billion each year, securing reliable buyers for Canadian energy that has traditionally gone to the United States. Third, backing within the financial system. The 40 nations consent to use the Canadian dollar for their mutual commerce, to bolster the Canadian dollar via currency exchange arrangements, and to offer emergency funding should Canada encounter monetary difficulties due to tensions with the United States. In practice, this shields Canada's economy with the collective financial strength of those 40 countries. Fourth, diplomatic sidelining of the United States. All 40 nations pledged to scale back interactions with Washington, delay or scrap planned bilateral meetings, and align their stances in global bodies to block U.S. proposals until the disagreement with Canada reaches resolution. Subscribe immediately, because what comes next explains how Carney formed this partnership and why nations everywhere concluded that backing Canada served their long-term goals. From what diplomatic insiders report, Carney started reaching out to leaders almost right after concluding his speech to Parliament yesterday. Rather than requesting help, he presented a clear case. He explained to each one that the current U.S.-Canada standoff serves as a critical example of whether democratic countries will allow economic bullying and breaches of independence by more powerful states. He pointed out that if the United States succeeds in forcing Canada's hand, it can do the same to any nation. He gave each leader a straightforward option: join Canada to reinforce the idea that sovereignty counts, or remain quiet and concede that strength dictates rules. Every leader he contacted agreed. The European Union responded first. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is said to have informed Carney that the EU has grown worried about unpredictable U.S. policies over recent months, and standing with Canada offers a chance to prove Europe will uphold a rules-based global system, even if it requires standing up to the United States. The United Kingdom came on board right after. Prime Minister Keir Starmer reportedly noted that Britain already has a defense partnership with Canada, and broadening it to cover trade and diplomatic backing feels like a logical next step. Japan and South Korea followed. Although both maintain security ties with the U.S., they have quietly voiced irritation with Trump's deal-making style toward alliances. Backing Canada lets them indicate they want equal treatment as partners rather than lesser players. Australia and New Zealand signed on as fellow Commonwealth members supporting Canada. Several Latin American countries, such as Mexico, Chile, and Brazil, joined due to their own experiences with U.S. economic leverage and their view of Canada's stand as an example worth following. African countries participated because many have dealt with exploitation of their resources by bigger powers and see Canada's defense of resource control as matching their priorities. By midnight yesterday, Carney had secured promises from 40 nations. By 6:47 this morning, the diplomatic note reached Washington. Proof point 1, the economic numbers. These 40 coalition members together hold roughly $58 trillion in GDP against the United States' roughly $27 trillion. They handle more than 50% of world trade. If they apply favorable trade rules for Canada and jointly cut back dealings with the U.S., America would quickly lose export outlets, face steeper import prices, and undergo major economic shrinkage. The U.S. simply cannot substitute $58 trillion worth of economic connections. The figures make that clear. Proof point 2, the energy supply chain. The energy buying promises from Europe and Asia add up to $180 billion yearly, surpassing the worth of Canadian energy now sent to the United States. Canada could shift every barrel of oil, every unit of gas, and every unit of electricity elsewhere while still earning higher returns. The U.S. would forfeit reliable energy sources. Canada would secure varied income sources and lessen reliance on one main customer. Proof point 3, the financial safety net. Currency swap deals involving 40 nations ensure that any U.S. attempt at financial pressure against Canada would trigger liquidity support to keep Canadian markets steady. Canada effectively gains a $15 trillion buffer. The U.S. loses the ability to use monetary tools to compel Canadian agreement, since Canada enjoys greater allied financial backing than the U.S. can muster against it. Proof point 4, the reality of diplomatic exclusion. When 40 countries simultaneously lower their level of contact with the United States, the impact spreads everywhere. Global climate talks grind to a halt because key players refuse serious discussion with the U.S. trade negotiation stall. Security teamwork grows complicated. The United States ends up marginalized in international settings, not for ideological reasons, but because of its conduct toward Canada. That marginalization continues until the U.S. shifts direction. Here's how things unfolded in Washington once the diplomatic note arrived. At 7:30 a.m., the Secretary of State received a briefing. Sources say the secretary instantly grasped how serious it was and called an urgent session. By 8:15 a.m., the National Security Council had convened. The single question on the table: how should the United States handle 40 nations acting in unison against it? The general view was that no strong option exists. The U.S. cannot impose countermeasures on 40 countries all at once. It cannot find substitutes for the trade, investment, and collaboration those nations supply. Diplomatically, the U.S. has been outplayed with few ways to turn things around. At 9:30 a.m., Trump received the briefing. Sources indicate he was informed that Canada had formed a 40-nation group ready to launch joint economic steps if U.S. compliance doesn't happen by March 18th. Trump reportedly inquired about the specific countries and grew more upset as the names were listed. Hearing that the UK, France, Germany, Japan, and other longtime allies were included, Trump is said to have called it unthinkable and insisted those nations would never carry it out. Advisors clarified that the pledges are official and that preliminary steps have started in certain places. Trump reportedly asked how the U.S. might fracture the group. The response: the sole path is complying with Canada's requests, since the coalition was created precisely to compel exactly that outcome. At 11 a.m., the White House released a statement. The United States regrets that certain countries have decided to involve themselves in what is a private issue between the U.S. and Canada. Such joint conduct is without precedent and improper. The United States will not allow outside nations to coerce it into terms that weaken American sovereignty. The wording sounded firm, yet provided no actual plan. At 1 p.m., the State Department conducted a press session. When asked if the administration acknowledged the gravity of 40 nations uniting against the U.S., the spokesperson replied that the situation was under review. That vague reply spoke volumes to journalists. The administration lacks a strategy. Congress reacted swiftly and with alarm. Senator Mitch McConnell put out a statement. 40 nations have banded together against the United States due to this administration's careless approach. This qualifies as a national crisis. The president needs to agree to Canada's conditions without delay. Senator Chuck Schumer commented, "We are witnessing the breakdown of America's worldwide leadership right before our eyes. The president has cut us off from our strongest partners. This has to stop immediately." Some staunch Trump supporters in the Republican Party even diverged. Senator Lindsey Graham remarked, "I back the president on many matters, but when 40 countries come together against us, it's time to rethink our stance. Here are two possible paths forward. Scenario 1, compelled agreement. The combined economic and diplomatic strain from 40 nations grows too intense to withstand. Markets keep dropping, energy costs surge, corporate leaders press for resolution. By March 15th, 3 days shy of the deadline, Trump declares he will satisfy all 5 Canadian demands. He presents it as a practical move rather than defeat. Canada agrees. The 40-nation group disbands, though U.S. standing on the world stage suffers lasting harm. The globe now knows unified resistance can compel shifts in U.S. policy. That precedent will resurface. Scenario 2, a reshaped global structure. Trump holds firm and refuses to yield. March 18th passes without fulfillment. Canada enacts every promised step. The 40 nations roll out their coordinated backing for Canada and reduced involvement with the U.S. Over the following 6 months, worldwide trade flows reorganize to bypass rather than center on the U.S. The American-led system gives way to a multipolar arrangement where groups of mid-level powers function without depending on Washington. U.S. reach shrinks from worldwide to largely regional, and that change sticks. I'm keeping an eye on whether any of the 40 nations openly verify their role in the group, whether Trump offers any sign of openness to compromise, and whether financial markets respond once the reality of U.S. isolation sinks in. In under 24 hours, 40 nations rallied against Trump. Carney created a partnership that will either compel U.S. concession or bring an end to American global primacy. 13 days left.